Next time you can pick up your own mail. And another thing, if I find one more of those bloody stupid little yellow notes, I may not be responsible for my actions.
Nice chatting with you, Mr. Melville.
During the 1990s, One Foot in the Grave became one of the most popular, mainstream yet subversive sitcoms in history, attracting up to 20 million viewers. We couldn't get enough of the curmudgeonly old bloke in the hat, who we all felt we knew already.
I'm always amazed at the number of people who say to me, I've got a Victor Meldrew at home. I mean, that's why it was such a riotous success. The man isn't as typical of so many men, just writ large.
Mr. Meldrew, is it? I hope it's a convenient moment. My name's Barney. I wonder if I might just ask you a few questions on the subject of satellite television. There's no obligation to buy.
Does it look like a bloody convenient moment?
I don't think there's a concern,
Margaret!
My guiding formula was always that I could contrive quite bizarre events, providing that the characters behaved believably and with integrity according to their personality.
1 minute he would have the audience laughing like trains, the next minute he'd just put in something rather tragic and very sudden.
So how is your grandmother now? Not giving any cause for concern or anything?
Oh, no. Not now she's dead.
It looked, for all the world, like a quite conventional suburban sitcom. You know, had the right number of sofas and armchairs. And then there was this kind of dark, macabre, slightly sinister underbelly to the whole thing.
One Foot in the Grave was a fabulous concoction of surreal black humour, existentialist angst and pure farce, creating one of the most daring and original peak-time comedies. The story of One Foot in the Grave started in the 60s, when a precocious home counties schoolboy, David Renwick, developed a lifelong passion for comedy and decided to become a comic writer himself.
We had a school trip up to see an episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus. It was the Lumberjack episode.
I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I sleep all night, I work all day. He's a lumberjack and he's okay. He sleeps all night and he works all day.
I just remember going into, to a BBC television studio with all the lights and the whole, the kind of magic of that, of the surroundings, and feeling what a great life it would be to just do that for a living.
After leaving school, David worked as a reporter on his local paper, the Luton News. Hardly ideal for an aspiring comedy writer, so he wrote sketches in his bedroom at night, sending them to the BBC. His persistence paid off, and he became a regular contributor to the topical radio show Weekending. There he met Andrew Marshall, who would be his writing partner for the next 17 years.
Well, the first time I had any material used, is just the most magical experience, like going to America for the first time.
Besides Weekending, David also started making a name for himself as a TV sketch writer, contributing to primetime shows like The Two Ronnies, for which he wrote the famous Answer Before the Last Mastermind sketch.
And your time starts now. What is paleontology?
Yes, absolutely correct.
What's the name of the directory that lists members of the peerage?
A study of old fossils.
The first major TV show that David Renwick and Andrew Marshall wrote together was the bleak but slapstick political satire Whoops Apocalypse. It featured, amongst others, Rick Mayall and John Cleese, and won enough of a cult audience for a feature film to follow, which introduced David to a certain Scottish actor.
Richard Pearson and I were put on these crosses in Queen's Park football ground, and I did overhear the director and the lighting cameraman saying, well, we could just leave them up there for a bit, waiting for the light to change. And I complained bitterly.
That was the first time I saw that kind of intense, no, how you would describe it, really, probably wishing he wasn't there.
Richard Wilson had been acting in TV comedy and drama since the late 60s, appearing in solid TV fare like Dr. Finley's Casebook, Crown Court, and Only When I Laugh with James Bolam, Peter Bowles and Christopher Strawley. Marshall and Renwick cast Richard Wilson in their next project, Hot Metal, a wild satire on tabloid journalism where elements of the outraged Victor are now evident.
I'm here today with a personal mandate from Mr. Rathbone to clean this paper up, starting with this little gem. The male members of the royal family, how do they measure up to each other? This is nothing short of pornography.
When Andrew Marshall went off to work on his solo projects, including 2.4 Children, David Renwick decided to write a sitcom of his own. The central character was based partly on a Walter Matthau character in Neil Simon's Plaza Suite, and partly on himself.
I never made any secret of the fact that Victor Meldrew, is me, totally. Which is not to say that I behave in the same way that he does, but the attitudes are universally are my attitudes.
The series was commissioned, but the one foot that we know and cherish nearly didn't happen. Richard Wilson didn't want to be Victor Meldrew.
Good morning.
Goodbye. Victor was 60, and I think I was 54 or 55, and I just hadn't seen myself playing older people yet. It was strange. There's only 5 years difference.
And in my normal pessimistic way, I think for most of that period I was thinking, well, I've written some scripts I'm quite pleased with here, and it's all going to go down the toilet because, we'll get some competent actor to play the part, or very good actor, but not a funny actor. And it will be, nothing really, nothing without Richard.
Luckily for the viewing public and sitcom history, the producer-director Susie Belbin, who had worked on long-running successes like Bread and Only Fools and Horses, was now on board. She wouldn't take Richard's no for an answer.
First of all, she said to my agent, does Richard know that David has written them for me? And I said, no. He might have told me. And then she persisted further by sending me another 3 scripts, I think. And I saw more what David was after.
They'd got their Victor, but now he needed a wife. In casting Margaret, Susie and David went for an actor with a solid dramatic background. Annette Crosbie had made her name as another long-suffering wife, Catherine of Aragon, in the 70s serial The 6 Wives of Henry VIII. She'd also made her mark as Hayley Mills's alcoholic mother in the film Skye West and Crooked.
Why do you do all these things to me?
Vicar said you'd understand.
Well, I don't.
I thought you wouldn't if you was drunk.
I went through a run of, if you want any kind of maniac, get Annette Crosbie. Nympho, klepto, anything, you just get Annette Crosbie.
Well, Annette came in to meet us, and of course the room sort of froze over as she came in because she frightened us all to death. So Susie summoned up the courage to get her to read a bit for us. And of course it was wonderful. So that was a huge relief that we left that room thinking, well, we've got Margaret.
Supposedly cast as the sensible foil to Victor, Margaret proved she could get cross too if the situation demanded.
So much comedy is about friction, and without that friction, you don't have the laughs.
Margaret may have ranted at Victor, but it didn't disguise her deep devotion to him.
I suppose this is what it's all about, really, isn't it? When it comes to it, marriage, reaching 60 and spraying each other with Ralgex.
She's an ordinary, average woman. In a marriage that's gone on for a very long time, it's not seething with passion, lust, or anything else.
I could stuff a mattress with your pubic hair.
They've got used to each other, and she'll defend them to the death.
They didn't show their love a huge amount. Victor was not a touchy-feely person, terribly, but then I think a lot of marriages are like that, especially of their age. But I think it was just a mutual support and needing each other.
I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking.
It's all right.
burgling on as usual. The first thing that came into my head, you don't know what you're saying.
I know.
The mutual need stemmed from the tragedy of a lost child earlier in their lives.
I was thinking about him just this morning, funnily enough. Running into Glynis outside the post office with Michael. She had him just 4 days before, if you remember. She was coming out of hospital just as I was going in.
I don't know where that came from. It wasn't sort of preconceived when I wrote the first series, for instance, because that was at the end of the second series. It sort of felt right at the time.
But that lay ahead. Episode 1 of One Foot shows Victor being given the boot.
You must be thrilled to bits.
Thrilled to bits.
Of course, the biggest problem of all was, how do you ever replace a man like Victor Meldrew? Well, basically, with this box.
Box.
I know. Isn't it amazing what they can come up with these days? It does everything you used to do, except complain about the air conditioning.
The thing about Victor was that he wasn't a pensioner, as a lot of people think he was. He was made redundant early, and he was someone who spoke out about what he saw was wrong with society, and he had time on his hands to follow it through.
With many men of Victor's age being dumped before their time, David Renwick had plugged into the zeitgeist. Besides being unwanted at work, Victor finds that at home he's treated as if he wasn't there by Margaret and her friend, the spectacularly annoying Mrs. Warboys.
You'll soon be through those underpants again, I see.
I know, Jean. It's a mystery to me how he does it. Look! He wear out a suit of armour.
They don't seem to last 5 minutes on him, do they?
Mrs. Warboys is a kind soul, tactless, absolutely tactless, socially inept in many ways, but wanting to please.
Playing Jean Warboys was Doreen Mantle, an experienced stage and screen actor who appeared in Yentl with Barbara Streisand and the 1980 TV version of Pride and Prejudice. David Renwick enjoyed torturing his characters, Mrs. Warboys most of all.
I think David must have had some aunt or something who he never really could on with. But Mrs. Warboys had a great ability to just get up Victor's nostril. And they weren't too chummy.
Oh, I want to get out. I feel extremely dizzy.
No, don't rock the frame like that. It won't do it any good.
The thing about Mrs. Warboys is that she is a foil. She's a classic foil. And it's just that old thing that you can't really define. Why is it funny for certain things to be happening to Mrs. Warboys that if they were happening to Margaret would not be funny at all?
To play Victor's neighbour, David Renwick called on the services of an actor he'd written for before in Alexei Sale's Stuff. Owen Brenman played the decidedly off-the-wall Nick Swaney.
Morning, Mrs. Meldrew. Is it me or is it moist?
He is relentlessly cheerful, and also the problem I had was he comes on at 100 miles an hour, so there's not like normal people where they sort of ease their way into a conversation. Nick Swaney has to sort of come through the door all guns blazing.
I don't know what it is about Owen that just particularly amuses me, but it does. I mean, just Owen stepping through the fence saying, "Morning, Mr. Meldrew, is it me or is it moist," or whatever.
A running gag and a hint of surreal things to come is Nick's elderly mother. Talked about, but never seen.
I put some jam on your doorstep. Hope that was all right. Grape and peach, courtesy of Mother. He says, thank you very much indeed.
Halfway through the second series, David Renwick introduced the neighbour who was to become yet another stone in Victor Meldrew's hoof, Patrick Trench, played by Angus Deaton. Like Owen Brenman, Angus Deaton had already worked with David Renwick before on Stuff.
I mean, Angus was like a latter-day Cleese, really. I mean, I don't think he ever set out, consciously to become that. But he just had that wonderful review-style rhythm and diction.
Before the next programme, we're just going back to that big story again. Bob Whip-Jip-Jup-Jup is at the scene, and he's on the line now. Bob, how big is this story?
He was just the perfect person, really, to be able to bite off some of the quite complicated lines that I would write for Patrick.
Angus Deaton started his meteoric comedy career at the Edinburgh Festival as one of the Heebie-Jeebies. Angus lost the medallion and wrote and starred in KYTV as Mike Channell. In 1990, he became the regular host of the topical quiz show Have I Got News For You?, whilst also starting on One Foot.
It's,
Patrick and Pippa.
Patrick's wife Pippa was played by Janine Duvitsky, who had appeared in Alan Bleasdale's The Black Stuff after making her name alongside Alison Steadman's grotesque Beverly in Abigail's Party.
Traditionally, Janine had been cast in these rather gormless, sort of the girlfriend you don't really want to go out with roles all her life. And now suddenly she was being put together with television's Mr. Sex, as he was known at the time, was, you know, a sort of more interesting kind of chemistry.
Perhaps because of its fantastic characters and situations, One Foot in the Grave wasn't an immediate hit. The first series attracted only average viewing figures, and the critics didn't know what to make of it.
Having trouble, Mr. Meldrew? Can I give you a lift anywhere?
Well, I was just, very crestfallen at the initial reception. It was, I think over the course of the show as a whole, we sort of rode this parabola of reaction, starting out with mixed reviews, some good, some bad, mostly sort of indifferent.
Susie Belbin always said, just you wait. Early on, she would say, this is going to hit, this is going to kick in. Then we used to laugh at her and say, yeah.
Susie's instincts were right, and audiences soon started to warm to Victor.
I slightly disagree with the general consensus that he's grumpy, because I just think he rails against injustice. And actually, he shouts, but he never shouts without a reason.
I'm afraid I left my watch in your bathroom.
When Victor confronts the owner of an old folks' home about how she treats the residents, it's entirely in character.
So you did. There. Good night.
Good night. Oh, sorry. I very nearly forgot.
Nearly forgot what?
I very nearly forgot to call you an evil, loathsome bastard. I would like to sewage right the way you treat these people, and I shall be calling the social services department first thing in the morning to tell them about the sickening brutality that goes on around here in the name of geriatric care.
He got cross about the right things. He was really... He was a concerned person.
He spoke out. He spoke out for the little man, for the ordinary man, and he spoke out about the things that he thought were wrong in society. So he was quite brave man in many ways. I mean, much braver than I am.
David Renwick allowed Victor his share of light-hearted moments too, like the high he gets after discovering some white powder in his shed.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. In the jingle jangle morning, I'll come following you.
Are you okay?
Absolutely, my dear.
Have you ever driven one of those before?
Never in my life.
I love Victor when he's mellow. There's a side of him that you don't see very often. But he just becomes very, very jolly.
One of the most unusual and daring things about One Foot was the way in which David Renwick would increasingly juxtapose funny moments with very grim ones indeed.
Afternoon. There was a bit of a mix-up with the workmen, actually. Fan-bloody marvellous. What am I going to tell them at the Herald? I'm sorry I never came in to her, but unfortunately I was buried up to my neck in a heap of rotting... What is it now? Who's that?
It was Mrs. Reynolds, who lives next door to Mum. Said she went round there this afternoon with her pension and found her dead in the armchair. Said they reckoned she'd been like that for 5 days.
Suddenly, you're in a very dark and rather depressing place. And it's quite brave, I think, to put that in the middle of a comedy show. And if it works, it means that the sad moments are that much sadder, the comic moments are that much funnier.
Often one of these moments would be spliced together with a bit of old-fashioned farce, occasionally in the same shot. Sometimes the laughter was at something extremely bleak.
Have you rung for an ambulance? I mean, what happened? You say there was no sign, no warning of any kind.
She only needed Mrs. Stitch, the tailor's wife, to win. Said she'd just got to pop upstairs for a moment to... and then, of course, when she didn't come down again...
So, where is she now? She's still up there.
Ronnie opens the curtains and there's these feet hanging outside, and she'd gone up the stairs and hung herself in the middle of Happy Families, which absolutely is very dark. And I remember we were taken to the broadcasting complaints about such a scene being in a mainstream comedy.
I think it helps in situations where you've got genuinely sad moments to have actors who can actually carry that. And I think if you've got a Richard Wilson and Annette Crosbie, they're proper actors. They've been to, they've done their Shakespeare, and they're able to carry off scenes like that.
Nor was Renwick afraid to break with current sitcom conventions. He set whole episodes in the Meldrews' bedroom, in the dark, and one entirely in a car.
Oh, God, dog, bitey.
Apparently it's one of the rules of comedy that you could never be funny if people weren't moving about. If they were stationary, and that's all that happened. Nobody kind of moved or anything or came in. That was it. You were three characters stuck in that. Well, that was one of the best episodes ever.
The episode also had one of the most memorable entrances, a third of the way into the programme.
I don't believe it. It's got me on all human endurance. I can't take any more. I can't take another second. Shit.
That feels a bit fresh. Find one all right, then.
And suddenly, the back door opens and in walked Mrs. Warboys, who had been up to the loo at a motorway station.
Did you get my crisps?
Oh, no, sorry. They didn't have any salt and vinegar. They only had smoky bacon.
I asked you to get smoky bacon.
You asked me to get salt and vinegar.
I said, don't get salt and vinegar. I said, get smoky bacon.
Oh, they had plenty of smoky bacon.
But you didn't get any.
3 huge boxes chock full of them.
But you didn't get any.
No.
Thank you very much indeed.
Dark and unconventional though it was, the viewers loved it. And by Series 3, audiences were up to 16 million, and the 1993 Christmas special, One Foot in the Argave, was seen by 20 million people. With the show's huge popularity came the curse of the catchphrase on everyone's lips, much to Richard Wilson's horror.
David started rationing I Don't Believe It. And also he would cut them down to I do be, or I don't, and people knew what I was going to say. Of course, it's now sort of part of the national psyche.
Victor's catchphrase was to follow Richard wherever he went, even as far as Craggy Island.
God almighty! Look what it is. It's that actor. Who? You know, your man from One Foot in the Grave, the I don't believe it man. Oh, wow. Do you know what he'd love? Well, he'd love it if somebody came up to him and said his catchphrase. Oh, yeah, Ted. He'd love that.
I did think about doing it, whether I should or not, whether it would mean more people would say it.
I don't believe it.
And then I thought, well, maybe less people will say it because they know they might get punched.
David Renwick agonised over the script and then ran through every detail before recording.
The aftermath of the bath, I think there is more to be milked there as to what's just happened.
He thought it was a contraceptive. He thought it was a contraceptive. It turned out to be a sachet of mustard.
Yeah. I just think it's funny if you don't put in the it.
David knows what makes a joke work. He knows what makes comedy work. I remember that episode where I was rolled down a hill. We sat in our cabins in a very windy spot, waiting for David to find the right hill.
Someone should tell you you're really tedious company.
It had to be the right sort of gradient for the joke to work.
And in the studio, you're having to... A part of your brain is aware of all the other cameras, where they are. Are we getting it right? Are you... You know, eventually the odd preposition will go. As you do it, you know he's going to be waiting for you there with the pencil or the pad. But I think he's brilliant.
I remember one sentence that was underlined. It said, "Good morning, Mr. Meldrew," and it had the word "morning" underlined. And I thought, well, how else would you possibly say that sentence without emphasising morning? You know, good morning, Mr. Meldrew, good morning, Mr. Meldrew, good morning, Mr. Meldrew. You know, there is only one way of saying that, but David had to underline it, and obviously I dutifully obeyed.
Although the actors knew they had to stick rigidly to the script, the rules were relaxed for one guest star.
Yes. Look, this is thermonuclear. Profumo doesn't come into it.
Chris Gernon always says to me that when she was on location with Peter Cook in One Foot in the Algarve, that she was astonished that I'd given her as production assistant the instructions that so long as Peter got the general gist of what I'd written, then it was okay not to pick him up on every single syllable.
He came in and I was like, OK, should we just run through the lines? He was like, I haven't got any lines. And I was like, well, there's 2 pages of dialogue. He's going, no, I've just got to fall out of a tree, which was a 30-foot tree. He was perfectly happy. He'd be perfectly happy to fall 30 foot out of a tree. And slightly alarmed that he had 2 pages of dialogue that he hadn't learned.
You hear that? They're walking a throw with a dead halibut stuck to your foot. I've never in all my life known such shoddy, bloody work. Who are you? Superman's granddad. I can't hear myself think with you shrieking about like a rutting gibbon. Shrieking like a... Who the hell's shrieking? Who's shrieking? A hand grenade could go off in your mouth and no one would hear it. For God's sake, show some consideration for the rest of the human race and shut your bleeding trap.
Throughout Margaret and Victor's many disasters, their relationship remained solid, despite the odd temptation.
Annette was always asked, why do you stay with that man? And I think the simple answer is that they loved each other. I mean, I wouldn't like to live with Victor, I have to say.
What was that for?
Just kissing you goodbye, Ben.
Good. What do you mean?
It's like Christmas presents, isn't it? They always look so exciting and full of promise, sitting there under the Christmas tree. And then once you've opened them, all the mystery's gone. It'd be much better to leave them as they are with their wrapping paper on. That way you'll never be disappointed.
With the confidence a hit brings, David Renwick could delve deeper into his other characters. Nick Swaney revealed another side after seeing his double on TV.
This is
is Skip Hoberman for CNN News on the southern slopes of the Argyll-Bullock Pass.
He wasn't a relative or anything.
Oh, no. It's just a bit of a shock to the system, something like that. As if, I don't know, someone was taunting me with a glimpse of the man I should have been. I was very pleased that David did that. So he's not just this sort of figure of fun, he's actually a proper person who is worried about what's going to happen to him.
You know who you're starting to turn into, don't you? And the frightening thing is, you can't even see it.
Patrick's relationship with Victor was a kind of a strange one, because in some respects they became more and more like each other. And I suppose it didn't necessarily start off that way. As the series progressed, I think they almost came to sort of respect each other, because they realised that they were not that dissimilar.
I was just saying to Margaret yesterday, I'm going to miss Patrick and Pepper. Patrick and... what is it?
Patrick and Pippa.
That's right. Patrick and Pitter. Sounds like a Hungarian sandwich, if you ask me.
They were admittedly getting quite drunk at the time, but I think the idea was that they actually sort of came together towards the end.
OK, how long would it take you to just race upstairs, do you think?
There was a major setback for One Foot in 1997 when Susie Belbin, who had steered the show from the start, left because of ill health.
That's about right. Now, if you could very quickly run down it for me then, please.
She handed over the reins to Christine Gernon, who'd also been there since the beginning.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I mean, of course, it was a huge blow to lose Susie after. I mean, I was very aware, of course, that she had been struggling for some while with health problems, and there had been occasions on earlier shows where I and Chris had to take over the filming in her absence when she just hadn't been able to make it. So that was kind of like the end of an era.
By now, One Foot had run for 5 series, with every conceivable misery being heaped upon Victor. So when asked to write more, David Renwick came up with a perfect ending. 2 feet in the grave.
I decided to kill Victor off for no better reason than that I didn't think I would be able to write anymore, really. It seemed to be the obviously the most natural and logical and appropriate end for the character in a show where we had tried to, reflect the truthfulness of real life.
I just didn't want Victor to take me over. So when David said, I think I'm going to stop and I think I'm going to kill him, I said, kill him. That's fine. Do it.
In a typically bold stroke, David Renwick cast national treasure and host of Watercolour Challenge, Hannah Gordon, as Victor's deadly nemesis.
Now, you won't believe it, but just a few days after his dramatic death, fans of the now-deceased Victor Meldrew have created a shrine at the scene of his fictitious demise.
It just astonishes me that there are still people who ask, is it really finished? Who just somehow can't accept that he's gone.
But David Renwick had a masterstroke of ambiguity up his sleeve for the final moments of One Foot. Hannah Gordon's character Glynis befriends the grieving Margaret, but when Margaret finds out she was responsible for killing Victor, she is presented with a dilemma. Did Margaret add a little something extra to Glynis's drink? Renwick left it to the viewers to decide.
Oh, that's lovely. Thanks.
Oh, dear God.
My mother actually asked me what actually happened then. So did Margaret poison Hannah Gordon, as if the action carried on after the camera had stopped shooting? So I had to explain to her that actually that was all that happened. You know, the actors didn't carry on, and we never found out whether she was poisoned or not. But you know, again, it was typical Renwick to leave things in the air, so no one knows quite whether she did or she didn't.
And my wife says to me, "Well, you must know because you wrote it." And I said, "No, I don't know. And it is deliberately, an enigmatic, cryptic ending that's how I want to leave it with the viewers."
I'm not telling you what I thought. David is not prepared to say, so I'm not. Who knows?
After One Foot, David Renwick realised his ambition to write detective drama in 4 series of Jonathan Creek, starring Alan Davis. And he went on to create the wistful comedy drama Love Soup, which brought together some of the One Foot team, Doreen Mantle, Owen Brenman and director Christine Gernon.
Sorry to keep you. It's been one of those mornings. I've just taken on this new PA as part of our disability quota, narcoleptic, but canny little worker when she's awake.
As well as going back to directing in the theatre, Richard Wilson continued to appear on TV in Born and Bred and Doctor Who.
What was the cause of death?
There wasn't one. They're not dead.
Angus Deaton came up against another irascible Scotsman in the reality show Hell's Kitchen, and then went on to appear in Nighty Night, a sitcom that involved him taking his clothes off rather a lot.
I thought they were literally the funniest thing that I had read since One Foot in the Grave. And scripts like that don't come along that often, to be honest.
After guesting in Jonathan Creek, Annette Crosbie also got a kit-off in the WI movie Calendar Girls. But Doreen Mantle managed to keep her cardi on when appearing alongside Ladies Guild members French and Saunders in the sitcom Jam in Jerusalem. For all involved in One Foot in the Grave, there was never going to be anything quite like it again.
I think it's kind of unique, and I think David Renwick would say he'll probably never write anything as successful again, and I think Richard would say he'll probably never be in anything as successful again.
It was very humbling doing Victor, because people used to write to you, and still do, indeed, about how much Victor meant to them when they were having a hard time.
4291. It's the sort of success that happens once in a lifetime. That's it. That's it for me now. It's never going to happen again. And everything else pales by comparison.
I don't believe it.